Love is the first and most essential bond that holds any family together, yet it is also the invisible thread woven carefully through time, attention, and tenderness in consistent, nurturing relationships. Zara Tindall had spent years refusing to turn private royal relationships into public confession. Then, in one startling moment, she broke that silence. Her words were not about crowns, titles, or palace politics. They were about her children and Catherine. Catherine did for my children what no royal ever did for me. It sounded like gratitude, but beneath that gratitude was something far more painful, an admission about Zara's own childhood that no one expected her to make. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, it is worth pausing to understand the weight of those words spoken by a woman who had always guarded her private life with quiet determination. Zara delivered the confession during a recorded private interview later released publicly. Her calm beginning only made the emotion underneath more striking. As Princess Anne's daughter, she had grown up close to the crown without carrying a royal title, meaning she belonged to the family while living outside many formal duties attached to senior working royals. That distance gave her freedom, but it also taught her early to stand alone. Then Zara named what Catherine had given Mia, Lena, and Lucas. She spoke of reassurance, attention, and inclusion that made her children feel secure among their royal cousins. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, held a senior role as the future king's wife, but her value to the children had nothing to do with rank. She remembered school dates, checked in after difficult days, and noticed when one child went quiet. Mike Tindall saw the change first. Zara stopped speaking, pressed her lips together, and looked down as though the next words had become harder to release. He placed a hand against her arm and said nothing. That silence mattered because the confession was no longer only praise for Catherine. It was becoming an admission that Zara had once needed the same tenderness and learned to live without asking for it. One memory made everything sharper. Zara hinted at a private episode involving Mia when the young girl struggled with a feeling her mother recognized instantly from childhood. Catherine stepped in before the discomfort could harden into shame, and what she did left Zara shaken by one brutal comparison. Someone had understood her daughter in minutes, while Zara had spent years teaching herself not to need that understanding. Suddenly, the question hanging over the family was impossible to ignore. If Catherine could see what Zara's children needed so naturally, why had nobody seen the same need in Zara when she was still young? And to understand why Zara's words landed with such force, the story has to move beyond Catherine's kindness and into the very different childhood that Zara had spent years refusing to describe. Zara's confession was powerful because it placed 3 generations of royal women on the same emotional line. Princess Anne, Zara herself, and none of them were weak. None of them lived ordinary lives, yet strength was never the real issue. The deeper question was whether royal children were taught to endure what hurt them, or whether someone finally decided that endurance was no longer enough. Catherine, Zara realized, had chosen the second path. Zara had always understood what her mother was trying to do. Princess Anne believed deeply in resilience, independence, and the idea that children should grow without becoming dependent on royal status. She raised Peter Phillips and Zara with discipline and practicality, determined that neither would confuse privilege with protection. A royal title, meaning an official rank within the monarchy, was never the foundation of their identity. Anne wanted her children to stand on their own. Zara respected that, but respect did not erase memory. Catherine approached childhood from a different emotional place. With George, Charlotte, and Louis, structure still mattered, but so did reassurance. She believed children could learn discipline without being made to hide fear, disappointment, or confusion. Zara had noticed the difference long before she ever spoke publicly about it. She saw how Catherine listened before correcting, how she gave a child time to recover before expecting composure, and how ordinary emotional comfort was never treated as weakness. Then one small moment stayed with Zara. During a family weekend, Lena became upset over something that might have seemed minor to everyone else. Catherine noticed before anyone could dismiss it. She crouched beside the girl, stayed close, and waited. She did not tell Lena to stop crying. She did not rush her. She let her breathe, let her speak, and only answered when the child was ready. Zara felt something tighten inside her. The moment was gentle, but it carried enormous weight because it reminded her of everything she had once been taught to handle alone. She had never doubted Anne's love. That was not the wound. The wound was learning that love and emotional comfort were not always offered in the same moment. Mike noticed her silence later. He had seen the way Zara watched Catherine with Lena, and he knew admiration alone could not explain it. When he finally asked why the moment had affected her so deeply, Zara hesitated before saying the words she she had never allowed herself to say before. "Because I remember being told to get on with it." That sentence changed the meaning of everything. Zara's loyalty to Catherine had not appeared suddenly. It had been building through quiet moments exactly like this, until one incident involving Mia pushed that loyalty beyond appreciation and into something far more personal. That incident would become the dividing line in Zara's memory. The moment before she merely liked Catherine, and the moment after she understood exactly what Catherine was. Every family has one moment that looks insignificant from the outside but becomes unforgettable to the people who lived it. For Zara, that moment came when Mia was still young enough to hide embarrassment behind anger. A royal family gathering had become overwhelming. Too many eyes, too much expectation, too many instructions about behaving properly. Zara was preparing to remove her daughter quietly when Catherine noticed something everyone else had missed. Mia was not misbehaving. She was frightened. Christmas at Sandringham carried its own pressure. Sandringham is the royal family's private country estate in Norfolk, traditionally used for the monarchy's Christmas gathering, where family warmth sits beside public expectation. Children were expected to greet relatives, handle attention, and move through traditions they had barely learned to understand. Mia knew she belonged to the family, yet she also knew her place was different from George and Charlotte. That difference suddenly became painful when another child innocently asked why Mia was not treated like a princess. Mia changed after that question. She became quiet, then defensive, then desperate to leave. Zara recognized the pattern immediately because she had lived her own version of it. When her daughter finally slipped away and whispered through tears, "I don't belong with the proper royals," Zara froze. The words struck too close. She had grown up as the monarch's granddaughter while carrying no title, learning early that belonging and status were not always experienced in the same way. Catherine entered before Zara could find the right answer. She sent an aide away, lowered herself beside Mia, and refused to rush her. The Princess of Wales did not correct the child or explain hierarchy. She told her something simpler. She never had to earn her place with people who loved her. Zara watched in silence, and the moment unsettled her because Catherine was not offering privilege. She was offering certainty. Zara felt the old ache return. She remembered what it was like to understand that she was loved, but still wonder whether she fully fit into the world around her. Catherine gave Mia the reassurance Zara had once needed herself, and she did it without making the girl feel weak for needing it. Then Catherine made one final choice. She brought Mia back with Charlotte beside her, rather than allowing her to return alone. No speech followed. No one announced what had happened, but Zara understood exactly what had been done. Years later, when she finally raised that memory with Princess Anne, Zara expected restraint. Instead, she opened a conversation neither woman had ever been ready to face. What began as Catherine protecting one frightened child was about to become something much harder. Zara confronting the woman who had taught her that strength meant never needing protection at all. The confrontation did not happen in front of courtiers. There were no cameras, no aides, and no carefully prepared palace language. It happened between a mother and daughter who knew each other too well to hide behind titles. Zara had spent decades defending Princess Anne's toughness, even admiring it. But after watching Catherine with Mia, something inside her shifted. For the first time, Zara was no longer asking whether her childhood had made her strong. She was asking what that strength had cost. Zara arrived determined to keep the conversation about Mia. She explained how deeply the girl had been shaken by feeling different from the more visible royal cousins, and how quickly that small insecurity had become something painful. Anne listened without interrupting. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, had always believed independence mattered more than status. She reminded Zara that children had to build confidence, the same principle she had applied to Peter and Zara when they were young. Zara understood the argument because she had defended it herself for years. But this time, she did not let the conversation end there. She leaned into the silence and said quietly, "I know what you were trying to teach me, but sometimes I didn't need a lesson. I needed someone to notice." Anne's expression changed. For several seconds, she said nothing, and that silence carried more weight than anger ever could. Zara did not accuse her mother of failing to love her. That would have been easier. Instead, she admitted something far harder. She had always known Anne cared, but she had also learned to bury fear, confusion, and hurt before anyone could see them. Strength had protected her, yes, but sometimes it had also left her alone. Then Zara told her about Catherine sitting beside Mia, refusing to rush the child, refusing to make her feel ashamed. Anne listened differently now. When the story ended, she asked only one question. Did it help her? Yes, Zara answered, more than you know. The simplicity of that exchange broke through every argument about royal duty, discipline, and resilience. Anne finally admitted that her generation had understood protection another way. She had believed preparing a child for hardship was itself an act of love. Zara began to see the painful truth between them. Perhaps the wound had never been a lack of care. Perhaps they had simply inherited two different languages for expressing it. But that realization changed something else as well. Anne now understood why Catherine mattered so deeply to Zara, and why her daughter would no longer remain silent if that bond was challenged. Because once Zara understood what Catherine represented to her children, gratitude became allegiance, and that allegiance would soon matter in a room where Catherine's influence was being quietly questioned. Royal power is not always expressed through crowns or constitutional authority. Sometimes it appears in something simpler. Who speaks when everyone else stays silent? Catherine's growing influence within the family had become impossible to ignore, particularly around the younger generation. But admiration can create resistance. When concerns emerged that she was becoming too central to family decisions involving the children, Zara found herself facing an unexpected choice, and this time she did not hesitate. Catherine had gradually become the person who helped keep the younger cousins connected. She remembered birthdays, encouraged family time, checked that children with very different futures were still treated as part of one family, and often became the quiet link between households. As the future queen, meaning the woman expected one day to stand beside William when he becomes king, her responsibilities already carried enormous public weight. That was exactly why some senior voices began to question whether so much informal family dependence should rest on her shoulders. Zara heard the concern differently. To her, this was not about schedules or dividing responsibilities. It was about trust. Mia, Lena, and Lucas did not see Catherine as someone managing a royal system. They saw someone who noticed them. After everything Zara had already confronted about her own childhood, removing that presence now felt less like sensible organization and more like taking away something her children had come to depend on emotionally. Then the discussion shifted. During a private family meeting, one suggestion was made that Catherine should step back from coordinating certain gatherings involving the younger generation. The words were careful, almost harmless. Zara did not treat them that way. She moved forward and answered with controlled certainty. "Not where my children are concerned." William looked at her, surprised by how quickly the line had been drawn. Catherine was even more uncomfortable. She told Zara that she had never wanted to replace anyone's role as a parent, grandparent, or senior member of the family. The prince understood why she said it. He also understood why Zara refused to let the point stand unanswered. "That's exactly why they trust you," Zara replied. Catherine had never demanded authority over the children. She had never used rank to create closeness. She had simply been present when hierarchy, public duties, family schedules, and tradition distracted everyone else. Zara knew the difference because she had spent years learning what happened when children were expected to manage difficult feelings quietly. Word of her defense eventually reached Princess Anne. The meaning was impossible to miss. Her daughter was openly valuing a kind of emotional leadership that Anne's own generation had rarely spoken about, and the comparison was no longer private. The palace discussion may have ended politely, but its emotional consequences did not, because Zara had finally drawn a line, and everyone now knew which side of it she would stand on. After Zara spoke, nothing dramatic happened immediately. No doors slammed, no statements were issued. That silence was precisely what made the aftermath so uncomfortable. Her words had traveled through the family because they touched something larger than Catherine herself. They raised a question about generations of royal parenting, emotional restraint, and what children had quietly been expected to absorb. For Anne, the issue was now personal. For Catherine, the praise had become unexpectedly heavy. Zara's remarks moved quietly through the family, and everyone heard something different in them. Some relatives saw only gratitude, a daughter praising the woman who had shown extraordinary kindness to her children. Others heard the deeper comparison beneath it. Catherine understood the danger immediately. She did not want affection toward her to become an attack on Princess Anne, and she insisted privately that different generations had been shaped by different expectations. What mattered to her was protecting relationships, not winning a moral argument. Anne received the full transcript soon after. A transcript, simply a written record of spoken words, left no room for tone to soften what Zara had said. She reached the sentence about Catherine doing what no royal had ever done for her, and stopped. The Princess Royal set the pages down without speaking. Minutes passed. Then she folded them once and left them beside her. There was no anger anyone could point to, but the silence itself revealed how deeply the words had landed. Zara learned that her mother had read everything, and guilt hit almost immediately. She had never wanted to humiliate Anne. She had wanted to explain why Catherine mattered so so much to Mia, Lena, and Lucas. Now she feared that telling one truth had reopened another wound. Mike could see the conflict in her because Zara was caught between refusing to retract what she felt and hating the possibility that honesty had hurt the woman she still loved fiercely. Catherine refused to let that silence harden. She contacted Anne directly and made her position clear. Zara's love for her mother had never been in doubt, and nothing Catherine had done for the children was meant to correct, replace, or judge Anne's parenting. Anne answered with characteristic restraint. "You do not need to apologize for giving children what they need." That sentence changed everything. It was not a surrender, but it was recognition. Anne had heard the criticism, and instead of rejecting it, had allowed it to reach somewhere deeper. Zara knew none of this yet. She only knew Catherine had asked to see her privately. Zara arrives expecting Catherine to reassure her about the fallout, but instead, Catherine tells her something about Anne that transforms anger into an emotion Zara never expected to feel: relief. There were no officials in the room when Catherine and Zara finally spoke. No family secretaries, no advisors, no one preparing language for public consumption. That absence mattered. For once, two women connected to the monarchy were able to discuss motherhood without the monarchy standing between them. Zara arrived believing she needed to explain herself. Catherine stopped her almost immediately. Anne, she said, was not furious. She was hurt, but not for the reason Zara feared. Catherine had asked for the conversation because she could see what guilt was doing to Zara. The Princess of Wales understood that the public confession had begun as gratitude, but she also knew something deeper had broken loose beneath it. Zara admitted that once she started describing what Catherine had done for Mia, she could no longer separate that kindness from memories of her own childhood. The comparison had not been planned. It had simply become impossible to avoid. Zara struggled to keep control as she explained that she still loved Princess Anne deeply. Nothing about the confession had changed that. Yet love did not erase the fact that she had often learned to manage pain alone. Catherine listened without interrupting, then reached for her hand. She told her that children did not need perfect parents. They needed adults willing to recognize what they had missed and learn something new from it. Zara finally cried. There was no dramatic collapse, only the quiet release of someone who had spent too long defending every side of the same wound. Catherine stayed with her through the silence, and then she revealed what Anne had said after their private conversation. The Princess Royal had not attacked Zara's words. She had not dismissed them as unfair. Instead, Anne had questioned whether her belief in toughness had sometimes stopped her from seeing when her daughter needed comfort rather than another lesson in resilience. Then Catherine repeated the sentence Zara was not prepared to hear. "She was stronger than I realized she had to be." Zara went still. Those words carried something close to an apology without forcing Anne to become someone she was not. For the first time, her mother had named the burden, rather than simply praising the strength that came from carrying it. That was when Zara understood Catherine's real gift. She had not protected Mia, Lena, and Lucas from every difficult emotion. She had done something more. She had shown Zara another language for care, one that finally allowed mother and daughter to understand what each had been trying to say for years. But privacy would not contain the story much longer. Zara's confession was already moving beyond the family, and one public moment outside Windsor would soon turn private pain into a national debate. The story had begun inside one family, but by the following morning, Zara's words belonged to everyone, and Britain was about to decide what it believed they revealed about the modern monarchy. By the next morning, Zara's confession was no longer being treated as a simple tribute to Catherine. It had become a mirror held up to the monarchy itself. Commentators focused on one haunting contrast: a royal woman saying that her children had received an emotional kindness she had once needed but never experienced in the same way. The public response was immediate, because the story was no longer about rank. It was about something far more familiar: parents learning from what their own childhoods lacked. Broadcasters quickly framed the moment as something bigger than a family disagreement. They spoke about changing expectations inside royal life, where older generations had often been taught to control emotion, remain composed, and carry difficulty without complaint. Catherine now represented another approach. As the future queen, meaning the woman expected one day to stand beside William when he becomes king, she held no formal command over Zara's children. Yet, the way she treated Mia, Lena, and Lucas suggested that influence did not always need an official role. Zara's words also divided opinion. Some believed she had exposed Princess Anne too harshly by comparing her childhood with what her children now received. Others pointed out that Zara had repeatedly defended her mother's love and strength. Her confession was not about cruelty, it was about difference. One generation had believed resilience meant learning to endure. Another was beginning to believe that resilience could also come from being heard. Then one moment captured the entire debate. Outside Windsor Castle, a small crowd gathered as morning coverage intensified. Windsor Castle is one of the monarch's principal royal residences and often becomes a symbolic gathering point during major royal stories. A newspaper front page showed Catherine laughing beside Zara's children beneath the headline, "The kindness Zara never forgot." Visitors stopped to photograph it near the gates, and suddenly, a deeply private family memory had become a public symbol of change. Anne saw the coverage before leaving for an engagement. She read the headline, folded the newspaper, and handed it back to an aide without comment. The Princess Royal did not cancel anything. She did not retreat, but those around her noticed something quieter in her manner, as though the public debate had forced private words back into her thoughts. Zara expected the attention to create more distance. Instead, she received unexpected news. Anne wanted a private family lunch with Catherine, Zara, and the children. There would be no statement, no photographers, and no attempt to shape how the gathering was understood. Zara knew immediately that this was not just another family meal. The monarchy had already been judged by the headlines, but Zara was waiting for a verdict that mattered infinitely more, and it would come not from the public, but from her mother. In the end, there was no grand apology. That would never have been Princess Anne's way, and Zara did not need one manufactured for the sake of closure. What happened instead was smaller, quieter, and somehow more powerful. At a private family lunch, Mia begins explaining something that has upset her. For once, Anne does not immediately offer advice. She does not tell the girl to toughen up or move forward. She simply waits, listens, and lets her granddaughter finish. Anne understood that everyone at the table knew why the lunch mattered. Zara, Catherine, Mike, and the children had come together away from public attention, with no statement planned and no attempt to explain the gathering outside the family. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, did not mention the headlines or the painful words that had circulated. Zara did not force the issue either. For once, silence did not feel like avoidance. It felt like room being made for something new. Catherine deliberately stayed out of the center. She had become the emotional link that helped bring this moment into being, but she refused to make herself the answer to another family's pain. The Princess of Wales listened while Anne, Zara, and Mia carried the conversation forward. Mike noticed the restraint, too, and he understood that her influence had never come from taking control. It came from knowing when not. Then Mia became frustrated while trying to explain what had upset her. Anne reached across the table, placed her hand over her granddaughter's and said, "You don't have to rush. Tell me properly." Zara looked up immediately. Those words were simple, but they carried decades inside them. Anne was not admitting that every decision she had made as a mother had been wrong. Zara did not need that. What she heard instead was recognition. Some things could have been softer. Some moments might have needed comfort before courage. Anne glanced toward her daughter, and Zara understood. Catherine had never replaced anyone. She had never challenged Anne's place or tried to become something the children already had. She had simply cared for Mia, Lena, and Lucas in a way that opened a door between generations. Through that difference, Zara finally found language for something she had carried without naming. Zara's confession now meant more than gratitude toward a future. It marked a change inside the monarchy itself. Strength no longer had to mean silence, and tenderness no longer had to be confused with weakness. Zara left without bitterness. Anne had learned her children had gained something better. Catherine had shown what was possible. There is nowhere else the story needs to go. Zara spoke. Catherine's kindness was understood. Anne listened, and a family once shaped by silence chose a different inheritance for its children. In the quiet that followed, 3 generations of royal women stood on the same ground at last, not because the past had been rewritten, but because the present had finally made room for a softer kind of strength. The bond that began with one child's fear had become a quiet reckoning, and in that reckoning, the monarchy itself revealed a capacity for change that no public statement could ever have forced. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.